So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Deputy Ambassador of Spain among us, thank you. Welcome to the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue. I'm Sabine Kroissenbrunner, Secretary General, and I'm very happy really to welcome Stefan Lütgenau and his team, the whole project of fostering Europe. First of all, and of course, as I will kind of repeat myself a couple of times, I'm very happy that you, coming from Austria, of course, but also Greece, Italy, Portugal, that you have come here to join this project and to join this very important endeavor. Let me say a few words on the Bruno Kreisky Foundation, on the Bruno Kreisky Forum, sorry, that was founded in 1991. That is 1 year after Bruno Kreisky's death in July 90. And since then, the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue has been following in the footsteps of this important Austrian politician. Not only was he important for Austrian social democracy, but also for the Republic of Austria, for rebuilding of democracy after Second World War. As you will also hear in an interview with Berg this morning, he was also important for Austria's foreign policy making and its role in the world at that time. This forum was initiated and founded by people that lived during Second World War and that had a good memory of the neglect, the difficulties, but also, of course, the steps taken, late, but finally taken by Austrian society and politicians to rebuild this Austrian Republic and as a full-fledged democracy, guaranteeing human and fundamental rights and the rule of law, and to come to terms with the past, to deal with what we have called a culture of remembrance. To rebuild values and institutions that not only in Austria, but also in the countries present today and in others as well, in Europe, not to speak about others beyond Europe, are under threat again. Also, the Bruno Kreisky Forum covers, and I will speak about that in a minute, it not only covers these topics related to rebuilding democracy and this republic, but also, as I was mentioning, his important role in foreign politics as a person that, as we would call it, developed a method which seems to be, which we might take for granted, but it is not, namely to build dialogue among stakeholders of international conflicts. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is only one of them, and certainly not the only one the Kreisky Forum has been dealing with. Many of you, or of us even, sitting here, do not really remember our historic challenges when we saw fascism, when we saw authoritarianism, and many atrocities, exclusion, racism, anti-Semitism at that time. We don't remember actively, but remembering also means in this context to learn and to listen to those people that have lived through these times and to be aware that even if we see in relation to the respective countries and now also to Austria, even if we of course see that the people that lived through this period have, they died already, but listening and understanding, raising awareness about the challenges of today. So even if we cannot remember, it's very important to understand why so many people followed authoritarian and exclusionary racist thinking and behavior, how resistance has taken place, how resistance was built. And before you actually resist, and we of course understand, we are aware that resistance and this courage it takes is usually, let's say, confined to a minority in all societies. But before you take resistance, to understand and become aware of the first steps when democracy, when human rights start to crumble and fail, and then how to fight against these. So the culture of remembrance not only includes, I think, that we listen and hear what kind of outrageous discrimination has taken place, what made fascism, authoritarian systems actually prevail, but also what means have people taken to resist, even if they might have failed at that time, but what is necessary to do that we don't fail another time. So in this respect, I think, and I don't go in every detail, of course, but I am particularly happy that you come here to the Bruno Kreisky Forum, because I think that the biography and the life and the life of Bruno Kreisky, as an Austrian Jew, as an Austrian Jewish social democrat with a bourgeois background, that from Bruno Kreisky, his personal life, of course, and his political identity, we can really learn a lot when it comes to dialogue, reconciliation, and building a consensus for democratic and progressive values. Because he was certainly crucial to rebuild and to build the Austrian Republic and democracy. What we also might understand at that point is that even if we are sort of, if we're glad and proud of the very fact that we have established this kind of remembrance culture, I don't go into detail, that's of course this is something you go through in these 2 days, but we also need to understand that the actual history of a full-fledged democracy in European countries is not so long as we might often think. And it certainly does not go back to the ancient Greeks. It is something we also have established in a period after Second World War, and even if European countries had institutions and certain traces of course of a democratic culture, that goes without saying, before, but the full-fledged democracy as we need to defend it as today is not something so old. So we also need to think about our actually means of, as I was saying, resisting the developments that now seem to aim for doing away with this democracy. And by full-fledged democracy, of course, I don't want to insinuate that we don't have any challenges or that it's a perfect. And I don't quote Churchillian saying we don't have anything better at the moment, and I think that is quite true. So, coming back briefly to the biography of Bruno Kreisky, who born in 1911, he served as a foreign minister from 1959 to 66, and then he became chancellor in 1970 to 83, so 13 years, where he basically was responsible for very important reforms. But before that, it's important to know that, as I was saying, as a social democrat, asking himself what he could do actually to join at that time Socialist Party before World War II, he was a couple of times rejected by this party because of his, not of his necessary Jewish background, but especially his bourgeois background. And he, so to speak, he fought his way through. He became a member of the party. In 1931, he left because he felt himself an agnostic, the Jewish religious community. And in 1934, when the Socialist Party was banned at the Dollfuss regime here in Austria, he became active in underground political work. He was arrested in 1935 and convicted of high treason, but was released again in 1936. In March 1938, when the Anschluss happened, so Austria was incorporated into Nazi Germany, he again was arrested, actually in a high school, at a place here in Vienna, which was a high school then, was turned into a prison, and it's a high school again these days. He was arrested there, and I think this is an interesting moment, also actually covered by a film that is now in the making, which shows the life of young Bruno. When he said, when he was incarcerated, he was first of all reading many, many books, and he was that established a sound foundation, and I underline the books, reading the books, not social media. So he actually acquired a lot of knowledge. And secondly, he was incarcerated, of course, with people of different backgrounds, so of different ideological backgrounds as well. And to sum this up, of course, one can go deeper into this. This actually made him also think about how to establish a consensus of people that had a Catholic background, that had a more conservative political background whatsoever. He was so this is an important period in his life before he then could actually escape and was exiled in Sweden, from where he also was influenced greatly in his further on political biography. This is what I want to underline when it comes to Bruno Kreisky as a politician and his political and identity. Important, I think, for what we can see today, and this is the message the Bruno Kreisky Forum would like to give also, is Bruno Kreisky was a person that certainly neglected identity politics, a term or a trend that we see is coming back and again and again. So language, culture, religion was also his belief, and I think and is certainly at the core of our activities. Language, culture, religion, background, wherever, whatever, they can all be resources of democracy. But neither culture or religion is democratic per se, and identity is certainly not. So to overcome the issue of identity politics, but to focus on what is your topic here, to focus on democracy and consensus building, to preserve and also fight for human rights, fundamental rights, and the rule of law. Here I'd like to say that the Bruno Kreisky Forum therefore also takes up the challenges in our societies we see today in a more diverse, not necessarily pluralistic, we hope for more pluralistic societies, and partly we are, but the challenges of today's pluralistic and diverse societies certainly is that we incorporate through migration all over Europe people with a totally different background. I mean, that goes without saying. So also different memories of discrimination, of their political past. And I think the culture of remembrance, the debate about remembrance culture, also must include the very fact that we do have different histories, and that the countries these people come from do, of course, differently deal with these histories. So many people we have now to incorporate into our democracies do have certainly different cultures of remembrance. Sometimes there is no culture of remembrance in the context that to overcome, of course, the regimes they have actually been fleeing. So this is, I think, a challenge we also do with certain projects, and also Foster Europe is an interesting and a very good example. But there are also others to also look at those who have come to us in a migration society of today, and to see what the culture of remembrance can teach to all of us, to look into the future and to think about what we commonly need to preserve, whatever background we have, or with all our experiences of discrimination, racism, and authoritarian structures. So in this sense, the Kreisky Forum sees itself also as a platform for these activities, and I'm very happy that this conference takes place here. I hope that you find these 2 days worthwhile and as a good chance, and also maybe a challenge to get to know and to network, to get to know each other, and to think about how, on the basis of all what we now will learn and again repeat on remembrance of the remembrance culture, how can we use this in order to look into the future and to fight the challenges we see, especially of those populist and also right-wing extremist forces we see all over Europe, and of course also far beyond Europe. Thank you very much, and have an interesting stay here at the Kreisky Forum.
Thank you very much, Sabine, for the very kind and great hospitality here and the offer to use the premises of the Kreisky Forum and the Kreisky House and a little bit the Kreisky locus, local genius factor. And I would like to introduce a little bit into the conference. As Sabine mentioned, we today live in a stable democracy with respect to human rights, with liberal pluralism, division of powers, free media, individual freedoms, and in a comparative affluent economic circumstances. And not all of our parents lived in the same environment of freedom and liberties. My parents, born 1932, endured the Nazi rule and the Second World War. In Romania, in Greece, in Portugal, I can personally remember the struggle for democracy and the end of the junta and the end of the Novo Estado in the Carnation Revolution. So this is nothing that has been there forever. In Austria and Italy, the democratic forces have been far too weak. Both countries had to be liberated in war by military force. The Vienna operation of the Soviet army brought up 70,000 deaths and 250,000 of casualties, only to free Vienna. Liberation here in the East did not necessarily mean security. Mainly in the Soviet-occupied areas, the raping was a common phenomenon. And we will not count or compare casualties and victims, but we note none of our democracies had been established without fierce resistance. Freedom, democracy, and human rights had to be fought for against a very strong political and partly military resistance. In some of the countries we are discussing, we saw even variations of first glimpse of democracy developed quite well, but in shaky systems before the Second World War. But as we know, they collapsed under economic, social, and political pressure. While we enjoy the freedoms, the security, the wealth, and democracy to an unprecedented level, our systems of democratic decision-making and participation is under constant reform and debate because our societies and their priorities are changing and developing. Beyond this constant critique and reform process, we see as a relatively new phenomenon partly strong political movements that question basic features of our democratic system, fundamental rights, and cover this with a new interpretation of the term democracy. Political, societal, and economic actors shift, reframe, or even reverse meanings of democracy in discourse, in performance, and in practice. They redefine democracy, distort its language, symbols, and practice, reframe its meaning in political discourse, cultural production, and in public perception. False prophets. So, how do we organize democratic resilience? How do we prevent undermining institutions and discourses? How do we make a remembrance culture resilient? And should we add perhaps the term responsibility to the term remembrance? We will see if this project, the from resistance to European integration is able to contribute to awareness, resilience, and perhaps responsibility. Let me talk a bit about the Austrian path we will enter today. And Matt Berg was already mentioned. He will go a little bit deeper into the matter. And I would like to just highlight a few points that I think are very much of importance for this country, its history, and the current status. Austria was liberated by force. There was something called the Moscow Declaration that was a declaration by the Allied, the four Allied in Moscow, the three Allied in Moscow. France was not there. And they said that Austria is the first free country to fall a victim to Hitler-right aggression. This is the quote. And shall be liberated from Germany. And the second paragraph is, Austria is reminded, however, that she has responsibility which she cannot evade for participation in the war on the side of Hitler Germany, and that in the final settlement account will inevitably be taken of her own contribution for her liberation. There was resistance in Austria from various forces, communist, Catholic, social democratic, Protestant, partly. But to quote the founder of contemporary history in Austria, Erika Weinzierl, there were too few righteous people. So we heard about victim and perpetrator. And one thing that strikes me is the alienation of Austrian remembrance culture of both. Very recent example in a village this May, commemoration of the end of the Nazi regime. Europe Day, they didn't talk about liberation, they commemorated the Jews that had been lived in the village. 36 people, small village, and they were very well integrated, quote. I was astonished. They were Austrians, citizens. What if the Nazi has decided to persecute all green-eyed people? Had been green-eyed people well integrated? This is very strange. It's an alienation, you know? Who was the victim? The Jews. Do I know a Jew? No. Who was the perpetrator? The Nazis. Closed group, not us. And we have, as historians, we can find many sources when Austrians persecuted as Jews, forced to hand their valuables, their belongings, to the Nazi regime, reacted to this letter informing them, sorry, I'm a highly decorated veteran from the First World War. I have fought for Kaiser and Reich. Huh? I'm a Protestant. My father was a Protestant, and I'm a nationalist German in my political orientation, conservative. So you cannot mean me. Huh? No, of course, it was not a mistake. The Nazi defined now who is to be regarded as Jewish. Two examples where I question the perpetrator alienation. One in 1938, the first days after Nazi took power, and one in 1945, the last 2-3 weeks under Nazi rule. You heard about the term Aryanization. Yeah? So the dispossession of everything that was the belongings of people who were defined as Jewish. And while this was a slow process in the German Reich, in 1938 in Vienna, in March, we had the so-called Anschlusspogroms, where the neighbors mobbed and robbed their neighbors because they were Jewish and because they were had not to fear any responsibilities. Austrians robbed and looted Austrians. They lived together next door for years, and it changed overnight. It was in a way violent and wild, so-called wild Aryanization, that the Nazi rule stepped in and tried to block it. And the crimes of final phase, Endphaseverbrechen, when it was clear the Nazi rule was collapsing. The Soviet troops had reached Vienna, or Austria was even partly freed. And then the director of a prison released those who were in prison. Prisoners of war, Jewish people, political prisoners, and they ran away, they fled. And then something happened which is called the hare hunt. So people in the countryside took their weapons out and tried to hunt these people, and they shoot these people in the forests. 130. This is incorporation of Nazi crimes and hate. Another example is the Rechnitz case. March, you can hear the thunder of the artillery, and there is a big festival and reception given in a castle on the countryside close to Hungary. And at the end of this nice party with a lot of alcohol, the people went out and shot 180 Jewish forced laborers in the area. This was military who did this. Yeah? The hare hunt were private people who went to church Sunday morning. The Rechnitz case is, I think, extremely difficult because till now we do not know where these 180 people have been buried. There was omerta, a consensus of we do not tell where these people are buried. And they're still not found today. They're searching them by air observation, by ground radar. And this community of Rechnitz, 2,000 people, they were very close, and till now we do not know where this is. So a completely different approach to what we are talking about, remembrance. So this alienation, I think, doesn't work. Yeah? We will hear about this and the rebuilding of the democracy in Austria a little bit later. It was a difficult nation building against this background. And in our course, in our local path we will pursue in the next month, we will discuss the questions of denazification, of sovereignty and neutrality. Austria was occupied by the four Allied forces till 1955, so 10 years of living here without sovereignty. The long debate on how and to what extent to Europeanize the Second Republic, because of its state treaty that ended the occupation, it was not allowed to join a European political union. Finally, we will look into the current political debate on how to shape Austria's future as part of an ever closer union, as part of a mere free trade area, as a strong political group is demanding here in Austria, or as a full democratic state, and what might mean democratic in these days. We will have a Slido element in this conference. So if you would like to ask questions, but perhaps you're too shy to raise your hand, or you feel it's not appropriate at the moment, please use the Slido with your mobile. This is the time, and we will integrate them. We will have today the sessions related to the first part of the Austrian path, and we will hear Matt Berg in a Zoom interview recorded because he is based in Ohio and he was neither able to come nor willing to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning. So we hope it's okay for you to see this, this Zoom video, and if you have questions related to this, please refer to me. I try to step in for him. And in the afternoon, we will see the Austrian, the national paths from our partners from Italy, Greek, Romania, and Portugal. And tomorrow, we will have 2 sessions here again, and then we will have a walk through Vienna to see the different, a selection of different places of commemoration for different groups and from different actors. And this is perhaps a built manifestation of the debate on remembrance culture we can look at. I'm happy to have you here. I'm happy that we reached the consensus to follow these 5 different national paths, and I hope we will have a fruitful dialogue and conference and a fruitful project. Thank you very much. Now we will see the video, and please forgive me for my little strange English because I'm the interviewer.
Hello, Matt. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello, Matt. Thank you very much. Hello, Matt. Thank you very much for joining us. I would like to introduce you briefly. Matthew Paul Berg, historian and professor at the Department of History at Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio. He is an expert in Austrian history, not only, but in Austrian history, and has extensively worked on the Social Democratic or former Socialist Party in Austria. Matt, we are having a conference on the transformation in Austria from a socialist rule to a democratic rule, the re-establishment or the establishment of the Second Republic. Can you explain a little bit about this SPÖ, the Socialist Party, as an anti-fascist democratic party before this, and this in contrast to the Communist Party, which was anti-fascist too, and the Fatherland Front, which was to a certain extent anti-fascist too, at least when it comes to the National Socialist. Matt, please.
Thank you, Stefan. Happy to be able to participate in this very interesting event. I wish I was there in person, but this will have to do. Yes, so as far as the Austrian Social Democratic tradition prior to the Anschluss is concerned, fundamentally from its founding in the 1880s, the Austrian Social Democratic Party committed itself to the democratic process. As we understand it today in Europe, and we're struggling to still find it so today in the United States, namely fundamental rights of the citizen, participation, protection under the law. And for the Social Democrats, that meant finding the balancing point between a legal path to transforming society without thinking of themselves as being reformist, which was an accusation leveled against them, mainly that they were strictly about change to the ballot box, because the Social Democrats, through their rather extensive ancillary organizations, were committed to trying to educate their constituents and would-be constituents to understand new ways of appreciating participation, enrichment, working class culture, to better prepare the people to be revolutionary arbiters of a new Austrian society, albeit within democratic parameters. This was quite different, of course, from the communists, as you alluded to earlier. Indeed, the communists were an anti-fascist party, as we see fascism emerge after World War I, first in Italy, but also in other parts of Europe, culminating in, of course, Germany and Austria, I would argue. But the communists were, in that sort of Stalinist tradition, proponents of, I guess, what you call democratic centralism, that the party knew what was best for the people, and the party signaled how it wanted its constituents, its supporters to follow a particular line, and the people were expected to fall in line, which meant voting a certain way as long as elections were part of the process, but also supporting plans for economic transformation, cultural transformation, and so on. But I think fundamentally, and the way I'll wrap this up, is that the Austrian communists, like their sister parties elsewhere, certainly in Central and Eastern Europe, maybe a little less so in Western Europe, were convinced that the party was, in a particularly paternalistic way, all-knowing. And therefore, democracy, as it was understood in liberal or social democratic terms, was decadent, was bourgeois, wasn't going to transform society. The final point that you'd asked about was the Fatherland Front, which was, as some of our listeners will know, had been a grouping of right-wing to far right-wing parties that favored a sort of Catholic corporatist understanding of how Austrian society would be organized. At its mildest, a kind of benevolent authoritarianism, looking after the interests of the people. At the more extreme, a more strident authoritarianism, one thinks of the adage in English that if you're going to transform society, you can't pull any punches. In other words, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Coming to the March 38 and what was called the Anschluss, the Social Democratic were pushed and forced into exile even before they joined the ranks of resistance. On the other hand, leading members of the party welcomed the Anschluss. Can you elaborate on this a little bit?
Yeah, but as for the last point, the leading figures in the party, one thinks, for example, of Karl Renner. They welcomed the Anschluss indeed, but it wasn't that they were pro-Nazi. They saw this almost as a kind of historical fatalism, that the necessity of Austria and Germany merging after 1918, 1919, which had been denied, was now happening as of March 1938, although under circumstances that they did not like. They envisioned, I think naively, that under those new greater German circumstances, there might be a new energy to transform resistance to the Nazis in the direction of a democratic socialist society. That's wishful thinking, of course, because their German compatriots had been living in exile, in prison, or in silence under the Nazis since 1933. But yeah, that's that. Others went into exile, as you point out. One thinks of people like Bruno Kreisky, one thinks about Oskar Pollack, one thinks about Josef Buttinger, some others who went to Scandinavia or the UK or to the US, many of whom remained there even after the war ended. Some didn't come back at all, others did. We can talk about that a bit later. But to round off your question, the Social Democrats did engage in resistance, but they weren't the primary force engaged in resistance. One has to acknowledge that the communists were much more actively involved in resistance to the Austro-fascists and the Nazis, for instance, between 34 and 38. After the Nazis absorbed Austria, the communists remained the larger force and resistance. That's not to discount that there were social democrats active or that there were Catholic conservatives who were active. Many social democrats tried to make their peace with the new regime and carry on with their lives. People got married, people had children, people went to work, people benefited from the regime as citizens of the new Reich, as long as there were benefits to be had and as long as people didn't engage in resistance. And that was a path of least resistance for many people.
So the support to the Anschluss was more result of the failed nation building of the First Republic.
I think that's a conventional understanding, and I think that it would be difficult to dispute that. Yeah, that's all people knew, that there had been nothing but economic devastation. Some people were humiliated with the loss of the grandeur that they perceived under the monarchy, but I think it was rather larger economic circumstances, the loss of social prestige. Yeah, and the Anschluss, for many, seemed to offer a way out.
Okay. When we come to April 1945, all of a sudden, the remaining representatives of the Socialist Party found themselves as part of a new formed government. Henner, you mentioned him, was handpicked again by Stalin to head the government. Yet we don't talk now about the Allied agreement or US reservations to this first provisional government, but finding themselves in government responsibility to build up a devastated society and country. What was their plan to deal with those who had been perpetrators or had been active as Nazi party members?
Yeah, as you well know, there were deep discussions within the provisional coalition government and then the coalition government after the November of 1945 elections as to how to deal with those who had either joined the Nazi Party or had become member applicants to join the Nazi Party. And all three parties shared the goal of this reconstruction of a vibrant Austria capable of standing on its own 2 feet. But what precisely would happen with those Nazis remained an open question. If Stalin said something to the effect with respect to Germany, but I think it's transferable to Austria, governments come and go, political parties come and go, but the people remain the same. So the implication there might be, for our understanding, that you punish the significant leaders in the Nazi Party, significant figures in the Nazi Party, and you re-educate the public. The Catholic conservatives had their own variation on that theme, as did the Social Democrats. I think if people had been in concentration camps or had lived underground and had really experienced the hardships and cruelty of the Nazi regime as opponents of it, perhaps there was a greater propensity to take a harder line against National Socialists writ large, both the more heavily implicated ones and the lesser implicated ones. But the parties themselves came to an agreement in the first denazification law that they would look at the more severely implicated people and remove them from positions of governmental responsibility, but also responsibilities in economy and society. For instance, they were prohibited from practicing law, serving as bankers, serving as heads of major industrial concerns. They were to be removed from teaching responsibilities from the universities all the way down to school children for the foreseeable future.
But there was, I think, a difference between the party on the federal level and, for example, in Vienna, when I think of the Referat on
the Bureau for the Liquidation of Nazism.
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit on this 8-month period?
Yeah, just a little bit, because I've invested some time and thought in that, so it's easy to go long. But very briefly, this body to which you refer existed only in Vienna. There's no evidence that there were branches of it active elsewhere in Austria, nor is there evidence that the communists or the Volkspartei, the Catholic conservatives, had a similar sort of organization.
Perhaps you make clear briefly what kind of commission this was.
Yes, yeah, I was just about to, but yeah. So what this organization was, an ad hoc committee formed by the Social Democrats based in Vienna, where the capital, provisional capital was, where the party headquarters was, with the goal of receiving information from the public about Nazis, former Nazis now, who had evaded denazification requirements. They hadn't filled out the questionnaire about their life and work during the Nazi period. They remained in those sorts of public service positions and other jobs that we had just talked about from which they were to be removed. And in effect, what this bureau did is it invited information, what I've called denunciation, which seems inconsistent with the democratic reemergence. But I think that if we want to look at what they were doing, they were inviting information on Seiden, right? Which are reports that can be looked at positively or negatively, depending on who's receiving them. The idea was, though, that people would submit information about people who evaded denazification so that this body could investigate, make sure that those assertions were legitimate. If they were not legitimate, if the information was not accurate, the party just said, the bureau said, sorry, this is not actionable. If it did prove legitimate, this bureau had no executive authority on its own accord. It then passed that information to the Austrian state police to take action, arrests, removal from positions. They shared that information with the housing office in Vienna, with other agencies, so that people might be removed from public housing that they shouldn't have had access to jobs that they shouldn't have had access to.
Time is running. Let us come to the second elections and the Second Republic and the campaign to 1949, when checked almost 900,000 people who had been banned from voting in the 1945 elections because of their Nazi affiliations. Not talking about those who had been still as prisoners of war or DPs or whatever, or in exile. So there were 900,000, almost 900,000 new votes on the market when they were allowed to take part in the 1949 elections. What was the position of the Social Democratic Party towards these former Nazis during the campaign and the election?
I think, to put it very simply, it was a pragmatic solution. These were people who had been reenfranchised. They were going to vote in one fashion or other. And rather than see those votes snatched up by their political rivals to the left or to the right, the Austrian Social Democrats made a concerted effort to win those voters for themselves. Clearly, the law gave those former Nazis, who were not the worst of the worst. Those people had to wait till the late 1950s to be reintegrated. But the argument was, if these people had the right to vote, the right to hold positions in economy, to teach and so on, once again, we would be foolish from that pragmatic perspective not to reintegrate them, but also there was a recognition that the energy of those people was necessary for the next phase of reconstruction.
So it is pragmatism, and it's partly what you mentioned earlier, denazification and education. But
yeah.
Yeah,
no, please go ahead.
Yeah, but is it only this pragmatism and these being forced to run a state where the judiciary that has been to 90% Nazi party members, or with the police force that has been to a 90% Nazi party? Isn't it that, I hate to quote Stalin, but the quote was very clear. Yeah? Parties are there and go, governments come and go, but people remain, and the Nazis remained, and anti-Semitism remained too. And there was some kind of perhaps a tradition of anti-Semitism in the Austrian party. And in addition to this, they were reluctant to call back those who had been forced for political and racist reasons to leave the country.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right about that. And we see that as early as 1945, when certainly some leading members of the Social Democratic Party organization at the federal level, one thinks of Oskar Helmer, the Minister of the Interior, who was I wouldn't call him a rabid anti-Semite, but he was known to be an anti-Semite, was reluctant to encourage people to come back from exile. He couldn't forbid them, but he was reluctant to encourage them. And there were others in the party who understood this for different reasons. I think, to whom we've referred, Adolf Scheer, who was the head of the party and the vice chancellor, were concerned lest the SPÖ be understood as a Jewish party in the eyes of the public by encouraging people to come back who had been party comrades in good standing, but Jewish, who had fled. Yeah. This, I think, is for the Social Democrats is very problematic, because to take the position that you stand on democracy, that you stand on the dignity of the individual, but to recognize either pragmatically or to be more negative, to pander to those concerns with the streaks of that anti-Semitism that flirt with that far right, was not a shining moment for them. It's easy for us, generations removed, to talk about what they could have done and should have done. And I'm not saying that we must refrain from doing that because we have the virtue of hindsight. I think it's important that we understood why some figures, not Helmer, who it's difficult to sympathize with, but maybe Rainer and Scheer, who were much more interested in building up the party, even at the expense of recognizing the contributions of others the way they should have or might have, and sort of make that argument that what the Austrian Social Democrats did was, in their own way, bought into this notion that the most important thing for Austria after 1945, after 1949, into 1955, was to build a stable, functioning state, end the occupation, bring in Austria's independence and freedom from outside control, ultimately, but also to do that wrapping themselves in the blanket of being the first victims of Nazi aggression.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We are almost at an end, and the most difficult question always comes as last. Can you wrap this up in 2, 3, 4 sentences and highlight what you think is most important?
Yeah. So, my caveat is I say this as an historian rather than as a sociologist or as a political scientist. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. In hindsight, we might know what we would have liked to have seen. We have a moral compass when we look at what happened through the middle part of the century in all the regions that you'll be talking about over the 2 days of the workshop. Yet at the same time, we need to understand the challenges of democratic capacity building under a variety of different kinds of challenges. The Austrian challenge would be different from the Italian challenge, from the German challenge, from the Spanish challenge, eventually. Yeah. And perhaps understanding those challenges could make us more attentive when new challenges emerge on the horizon. They won't be the same thing, but we can be more informed about how we point out what the potential implications can be.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is exactly what we will talk about in the course of the project for the next 24 months. Matt, thank you very much for your time and for your effort, and hope to see you in person pretty soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for listening. I pass this on to Ohio. Are there any questions? Because we went deep into Austrian history, questions of understanding related to Matt's talk. We try to make clear that it's not black and white, and that it's they had to make choices. And of course, they were not coming from outer space. They were Austrians, and they had been affected and active in anti-Semitism, in democratic thought, in all of these areas that Austria lived through. So they represented quite an element of the Austrian society. If there are no questions at the moment, I would like to link to the Slido again, if possible, and let's see what happened. Yeah, thank you very much. From an international grouping is here. Knowledge, of course, exchange is great. FREI VP2. I'm looking forward to this. Practical advice, and yeah, let's see when we go through the 5 paths and to see if we have more insight into the actual situation after this. May I pass to the next speaker and ask Laura Langeder from Mauthausen Memorial to give us her presentation.
Just gonna set up my timer to make sure I don't take up too much of your time. Thank you. Well, hello. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today and to be part of the kickoff of this important project. And so we've heard a lot about Austrian history and how the dealing with the Nazi past had like a complicated start in the earlier 2 presentations. And I'm here today to talk to you about telling Nazi history today. And also in the course of my presentation, I also want to talk a little more about how to tell about the Nazi history in the future. Just some words about myself. I am an exhibition curator at the Mauthausen concentration camp memorial. And my main project right now is to work on an exhibition of the topic of perpetration at the concentration camp, which is kind of like a newer topic for us when it comes to public history, and it's something that I feel is very relevant for future generations, but I will go into more detail on this later in my presentation. You all know we're at like a turning point when it comes to commemorative culture. We're a generation where the Nazi past turns from living memory into cultural memory, which means there is less and less people who have lived through the experience themselves, and actually there is less and less people who even know someone personally who has lived through the memory themselves, which means physical sites, objects, sources gain relevance as witnesses to the past, as people sadly fade as witnesses to the past. And yeah, I'm gonna talk a little about how we try to make the memorial site relevant today and also tomorrow. But before I do that, I'll give you a brief history of the Mauthausen concentration camp and also the history of the memorial. But I don't know how to... Thank you, sorry, I overlooked that. So the former concentration camp Mauthausen is situated in Upper Austria, which is about 150 kilometers to the east of Vienna. It is not just one campsite, it was a whole complex. It had more than 40 sub-camps or also work detachments or forced labor detachments, of course. And it was established right after the so-called Anschluss. So we've heard about the Anschluss earlier, in March 1938, when Austria joined the Nazi Reich. And just a couple of months later, in August, the Mauthausen concentration camp was established. It wasn't long until a second, almost as big concentration camp was built just a few kilometers apart, away from Mauthausen, which is called Gusen. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. I said there's like 40 sub-camps. The Gusen camp wasn't really a sub-camp, it was more like a branch camp because it acted independently in many ways from Mauthausen. But I'll go into this in more detail. The whole complex had about 190,000 prisoners, of which 90,000 died or were murdered. The biggest group of prisoners at the Mauthausen concentration camp by far was political prisoners. Other big group of prisoners were Soviet civilians, Jewish people, Soviet prisoners of war, and also Spanish fighters against the Franco regime. There were women. The first women arrived in 1942, and the first women were officially registered in 1945. In total, there was about 10,000 women at the Mauthausen concentration camp complex, the complex which stretched across all of Austria. It wasn't just one site, it was all over the country. Prisoners there were mainly forced to work at a stone quarry, so the Mauthausen concentration camp complex had a very strong purpose when it comes to economy. So prisoners were forced to work the stone quarries, but also were forced laborers in war production, war industry, especially weapon production and also plane production. And in the later years of the war, they were also forced to dig underground tunnels because the Nazi regime planned to relocate relevant production of war weapons underground as have better shelter from air raids. No. Where do I point this thing? Just there? Oh, thank you. The camp was liberated in 1945 by the US Army and made into a memorial quite early on in 1949. So we've heard earlier that Austria had a bit of a hard time dealing with its Nazi past, which had a lot to do with the so-called victim myth. So if you want to portray yourself as a victim, it's hard to commemorate a place of terror that you yourself operated and established. So even though it was made a memorial quite early on, it didn't have a very broad societal or political support or base. Right after the founding of the memorial site, this memorial park that you can see here. So this is the former camp. At least what is left, not all of the barracks were kept for financial reasons. So the Republic was trying to lower maintenance cost. So they only kept representative buildings. And then here, where the former SS barracks would be, a memorial park formed, which was basically initiated and financed by other states wanting their national prisoners represented on the ground. There was an exhibition established in 1970, initiated and curated by former prisoners. And then we have a shift in commemorative culture in Austria, where politics are forced for the first time to face the Nazi past and find different means to deal with it. That happens in the end of the 1980s, that's where it starts, and it really keeps rolling towards the 90s, and in the early 2000s, some measures are being taken. And one of these is to make the Mauthausen site a proper financed and professionalized institution. So what happened was the establishment of a visitor center that you can see in the picture over here. The team got expanded, and just there was a education concept. So there were there were like proper inputs on how do we teach people about the Nazi past that is more than just shock education by putting people there and letting them like deal with what they see and what they experience. So there was like just a general professionalism. And then a next milestone was in 2017, so quite recently, when the memorial, which was run as a department of the Interior Ministry, was made into its own institution. In economic and scientific means an independent institution that was also taking over more responsibility for sites of the subcamps. And then I put down another milestone that was just last year, 2024. That is when the government decided that they would finance a second major memorial site, which will be at the Goose Memorial, which I mentioned earlier. And I'll talk about the process a little more. All right, I need to hurry up, I see. I'm talking slowly. So somewhere in the process, my PowerPoint got a little quirky with formatting, switching around. I know it looks unorganized. It's formatting. I hope it makes it more interesting to look at. So I'm just going to briefly tell you about what the memorial is doing right now, and also how actually high the demand is when it comes to our services, which you know is something to. It is a good sign that people are willing to be there and to concern themselves with that history. So in the year 2024, we had 270,000 visitors, 1,361 written responses to inquiries. That number, so people can message us and ask for information on former prisoners, since a couple of years also former SS guards or SS personnel, and that number increased during the last years. Every year we get more questions, more people want to get in-depth information on their family members who have vanished at the camp, or not vanished at the camp, just being there as prisoners. And this year, it's a commemorative year. Just by May, we've already had 500 inquiries. So a lot of people are taking the time and the resources to do their own research. There is a need to find out those things. So we had 4,350 educational programs, which means more than 90,000 participants in those. And it is important to say at this point that the educational program offers more than just guided tours that are frontational, but there is workshops, there's interactive participant involvement. So all our guided tours are designed in a way where people aren't just confronted with information, but they can ask questions. They can bring in their own personal point of view. They can ask questions, which is important as this conference shows. Needs are changing, and the educational program is designed in a way to adapt to those changing needs of new audiences. Of course, we're online. We have 27,670 followers on diverse social media platforms, and we are also on TikTok, which I know is a controversial decision to make, first because TikTok is a controversial platform, but also because content gets harder to control. But it was a decision, since especially the youth is on TikTok, and they find information there anyway. It's better for us to give information that is reliable and true. And it is received well. So we have followers, we have views. Some of our videos have more than 1 million views. And then the last point I added here were 80 families of former prisoners were at the memorial this year and had a guided tour. that was especially suited to their needs and their questions. But to go to the main part of the presentation. So the topic was how to tell Nazi history today. And I tried to give you a little glimpse of what we do today. But while preparing this presentation, I really asked myself the question, isn't it even more relevant to think about how to tell Nazi history tomorrow? Because what we're trying to do is to make the past relevant for the future. We're trying to make people feel involved in this history, no matter their own family background, their own personal history, their own biases that they bring to the table. And one major guiding line in our educational program, or like for the memorial activities in general, is what's it got to do with me? And that is a question that I believe gets more relevant every year with this change of generation, where, as I said earlier, people might not even know people that have left through this time. So what's it got to do with me? Why do I need to go there? Why should I be concerned with the fascist past of my own country? And there is new questions, and we can tell. I said earlier the written inquiries on former prisoners get more every year, but there's also other shifts that we can see. There is a more analytical approach to things. So with changing generations, some topics that might have been a taboo before, we've heard there was resistance to talk about participation, about perpetratorship, they're loosening up. People are not afraid anymore to ask difficult questions like, what did my family do? What did my family know? What did the people of my town know? So there is a more interest in engaging the topic from an analytical point of view than there is necessarily only the need to commemorate former prisoners. Don't get me wrong, this will always be the main focus because it is a place of commemoration, but we also need to adapt to the needs of analytical and critical questions. There is also more fascination for the physical site. So I said earlier, we on social media, I think especially for young people, a lot of information gets consumed by digital means. So there's a lot of asking ChatGPT relevant questions, going online, looking at brief videos on TikTok, on Instagram, and the possibility to connect to a physical place plays a role and makes people engage differently with the past, which is why it's important to cultivate those physical spaces. And those physical places mean it can't all be centralized in the Mauthausen Memorial. So I said earlier that the memorial was established quite early, but always with the objective to keep costs low. We now choose a new approach where we not make all central at the former main camp of Mauthausen, but we try to be active in all of these places all around Austria. And that is important because people shouldn't go to a place to remember, but the Nazi past was interwoven with all aspects of the Austrian society because it was a totalitarian regime. So commemorative culture should just as well be interwoven with all parts of society. And that means going where things happened. By now, it's to offer exhibitions on more of these locations, but also a project that is running right now is just to erect memorials at some of these places. Just leave a physical mark that something worth remembering happened there. Making sure people are aware that what happened at the concentration camps wasn't something that happened in an isolated place, but something that was visible and happening all over the country with like more people involved than just the people at the camp. And one example that I want to talk about just briefly. So we are here in Vienna. This is where Mauthausen is. And then right there, this is where Gusen is. And Gusen was more than just a sub-camp of Mauthausen. It was a branch camp, which was at times even bigger than the Mauthausen main camp. And as I said earlier, the government decided to establish a second major memorial there. This is a long-term project. The memorial is planned to open in 2030, or that's when the process is planned to be finished. And what is happening is that this Gusen Memorial is not going to be a top-down project. We tried, or the team tried, to make it as grassroots movie as possible by making it a democratic process by establishing a participation project. So before doing any conceptual work on the site, there was a 2-year process in which stakeholders were involved in workshops, in surveys. These representatives, there were representatives of victim communities, there was a youth delegation, you can tell by that picture. They were even there and got an idea of what the site looks like. You have to know there is very few physical sites left at Gusen. So this concentration camp was completely dissolved and looted, and most properties were in private ownership until 2020. So in 2020, the state started buying some of these private properties back to make space for the memorial. But we're dealing with a site that has very little physical evidence left. So it really was about finding out what does the local community need from this site. It's a major change for a local community to have a memorial set up in the neighborhood. So what do they need to be able to live with that? What does the youth need? What do victim representatives need? What does this memorial, what should it talk about? What should it add to society? All of these decisions or all of these directions were not something decided by experts and put there, but developed in a process where a lot of people were involved. And the second project I want to talk about is with these new questions that people have, topics get more diverse. And I said it earlier, some taboos are broken, some interesting questions come up, and some of these new topics that we talk about or people are interested in are, I'm just going to name a few examples, the history of women at the camp, queer history, the history of sexuality or also sexual violence. All of these are topics that come up in guided tours. People want to know. People are not ashamed to ask anymore because the personal detachment got less and less. So one subject that we decided we have to establish as an education and fixed program at the site was a new permanent exhibition on the perpetrators. And it was very clear from us from the beginning that we're not going to just present a couple of biographies of some SS men, because even though it's interesting to have case studies, it always allows you to detach yourself. So, oh, those are really bad people, but they're dead now, so it has nothing to do with me. So what we're trying to do, and the process just started this year, I'm working on this exhibition as a curator and a project lead, but we're a diverse team. We have people from the research department, the collections department, and most importantly, the education department, working on this together to make sure we really catch people with what we're telling in this exhibition and still are respectful to the memorial as a place of commemoration. Because talking about the perpetrators at the memorial always holds the risk of making voices of the victims invisible, which is of course not what we're trying to do. However, what we are trying to do is make visible mechanisms and structural violence, and also the extent of societal participation, a system like the Nazi regime in general, but also specifically a complex of that size, like the Mauthausen concentration camp complex needs to even function. So I just put there some examples of interesting objects that we're working on right now. This is a picture of the camp commander of Gusen concentration camp, Fritz Seidel, and his wife at the SS gardens, which were not behind any gates, but right there in the middle of the Gusen town, so to say. So there is a conflict. There is no. There is civilians at campground. There is SS men that we often see as like monsters that do crimes that we can't associate with at all, enjoying the freedom of a garden and the beauty of a garden. And there's people seeing all of that. Those people also get visible in this. So this is German. Basically, it's a newspaper article on a football game that happened at the Mauthausen concentration camp. And the football court was right next to the infirmary camp, where fatally ill prisoners were sent to basically die there. So you have local football fans coming to a football game that's happening right next to deadly barracks, and the newspaper reporting on it. So we're not talking about an isolated space, we're talking about a very open space that people knew about. Also, this plan shows it. This is going to be the building where the exhibition is going to be housed at. It was basically the brain of the concentration camp, the offices of the camp commander. And it's very small, so you can't read it, but it basically says the names of the people who had the offices there. And it's not just men, there's women there. There's women names there, and not all of them are part of the SS. Some of these women were civilians from the local town that just worked there in the office. And they went home every day. They had a 9-to-5 job at the concentration camp, but towards the end of the war, no one knew about it. Like, you know, the people at the town said, we didn't know what happening, but then there were people going there to work, to see the dentist, to watch cinema. They had a cinema there. And all of these, so what I'm trying to say is with this exhibition, we are not trying to highlight single men. We're not trying to demonize single men, saying, oh, those were the mean men, they're gone now, we're good. We're trying to say, what is the responsibility of society? What does a system like that need to work to be tolerated, to even be tolerated by society? We try to make visible that women play a role in this, civilians play a role in this, the economy plays a role in this. I keep hitting that, sorry. And just look at perpetratorship, which is a tricky topic to talk about at the memorial, but very necessary, because what future generations need is to be able to spot mechanisms and systems that support fascist and totalitarian regimes that allow violence to happen, and probably already very relevant, that allow a society to grow tolerant to those processes. So, sorry, I took more time than I was supposed to. A little symbolic picture of the layers of history. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there direct questions for understanding, or if not, yeah, please.
Sorry.
Wait a second.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniela from Portuguese delegation, and I have a question. Thank you for your presentation, it was very insightful. Was there any resistance from the communities or Austrian society to the establishment of the memorial in Gusen? Any kind of demonstration, people against the memorials, stuff like that? Thank you.
No demonstration. It has been a process to take over, or it's still a process to gain ground, literally, to do the memorial. to buy the properties. People got used to using the space for their own needs. So it is a process to establish the memorial and the need to take space to do that. I think that is probably the most challenging part in that regard.
Any other? Yeah, please.
Hello, my name is Margit Paul. I'm a member of the local government in Burgenland, and I'm really very impressed by the presentation. My question is regarding the very beginning of the Mauthausen camp. You said that so the official republic was not that much interested, so they wanted to keep the costs low. And at the very beginning, when it started, right after the liberation, who ran the camp? So it wasn't official from the Austrian Republic, but was it former imprisoned people, survivors of the camp? Who took responsibility in starting the memorial?
Thank you. So the camp was first, when it first was liberated, it was used by the US Army and later by the Soviet Army. And then in 1955, with the State Treaty, it was handed over to the responsibility of the Austrian Republic, which took responsibility for it as a department of the Interior Ministry, where there were people, clerks responsible for the archive, for gathering information, gathering sources. But really, survivor associations played a very big part in offering tours, making visible, organizing commemorative celebrations, not just in Mauthausen, but also in the former sub-camps. It's mainly the Mauthausen Committee, who still are a very important partner for us as a government-run memorial. But at the beginning, it was really the prisoners. Also in Gusen, it has a very interesting story where, because everything was sold into private ownership, it was former prisoners who raised money to be able to buy a property where the former crematorium oven was. So all of that would have been destroyed if not the prisoners themselves felt the need to take action and make sure those things survive and are kept as witnesses to the past.
Hello. Hello.
It's working, please go ahead. It's working perfectly.
My name is Pyrrhus Mercouris and I'm from Greece. And my question is to how far is this legacy still a politically current in Austria? Is there a full stop? Has it ended? Does it continue to reverberate? I can develop my question if you want.
No, I think I got it. Would you like, should I?
I'd like you to develop it more.
Okay.
Do you still have a lot of skeletons in the cupboard that you have to take out and rattle? Are there still people who've made fortunes and are still politically powerful? Are there many victims who there has never been any justice? Is there any to use a South African term, truth and reconciliation? Or is there a layer of society that is still very much on top that benefited from all of these things and wants to keep things under the table and not discuss it?
Thank you. So I'm not even sure how to start answering the question. I think the whole country, everyone is still benefiting from it. If you look at the so-called economic wonder of Austria, how after the Second World War we got Marshall Plan money and became a very rich and wealthy country, all of that is based on infrastructure that was built by forced forced labor. And people were like offered compensation very late, with not everyone, or maybe not even half of them, still being alive in 2000. Some victim groups have only been accepted as such very recently. For example, queer people that were still persecuted under the same laws for years after the Nazi regime ended, or people persecuted as criminals, for example. And of course, I think if you look at modern politics, Austria is still struggling very much with also ideologies and taboos of what is okay to say and what is not okay to say. I think that is a process that is not gonna end soon. It's just changing and shifting, and which is why we have to keep up to date and with how we raise awareness and educate people. As I said, use the past for the future.
Yeah, if I may add, we will see this materialize tomorrow in the walk we take to see different memorial sites. But of course, there are two large groups that have never been perfectly or quite adequately addressed or even compensated. These are, for the entire Nazi Reich, more than 3 million Soviet military war prisoners. And for our Italian partners, the so-called IMIs, the Italian military internated, those parts of the Italian army that were in the northern part, which came under Nazi control or German occupation once in 1943, Italy changed sides and ended war against the Allied and joined the Allied forces. All the Italian military, the German troops could get hands on, were internated as enemy prisoners, and they were seen as traitors. Yeah, so they were dealt very badly. But this is something that is not really in debate. You know, forced laborers had been compensated to a certain extent, at least acknowledged. With the war prisoners, it's something completely different. May I go on in the agenda and ask for your understanding that I abused my power to change the agenda a little bit. I wanted to start with the historic insight first and then go into the issue of how do we deal with it today, how we address the fourth generation, the third generation, and how does the fourth and third generation react to this. And I especially ask for, thank you for your patience, Jennyfer Scheer, and ask you to the floor here and come up and give your presentation. Jennyfer Scheer, head of the youth department of the Jewish community here in Vienna. And I'm extremely thankful that you stepped in on late notice. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I will just start with a statement. Never again is now. We stand tall. We are loud. We wear our Star of David with pride. Am Israel Chai. It lives in our memory, our resistance, and our hope. These were the words of the Jewish youth. Just a few weeks ago, we were in Mauthausen at the ceremony, and this quote was a part of the youth ceremony in front of the Jewish memorial in the former concentration camp Mauthausen. This is not just a quote, it's a clear message. They are ready to take the responsibility. They don't want silence, they want action, they want truth, they want courage. They stand proudly, they speak out loud. And why? Because this is what romance must be today. And this is what they show every day. I'm the head of the I'm the head of the youth department in the Jewish community, and I have the privilege to work with Jewish youth since 7 years. I accompany them and work with them on different fields and areas: education, identity, activism, and above all, remembrance. Just shortly what the youth department or the youth commission does and what's the thing about it. The Youth Commission is the umbrella organization which is responsible for all the youth and student organizations based in Vienna. We work with them very closely on a daily basis. We organize events, projects, workshops, and also social gatherings. Our work is to combine and also to connect them. One of our main pillars, as I said, is remembrance work and commemoration work. It is part of our job to guide the youth and transforming a new remembrance, but also to keep the memories of the survivors. And I can tell you proudly, the third and the fourth generation is confident, very confident. They believe deeply that they can make a difference with action. Remembrance work has evolved. It has changed, and it has to change. We have to work on that. We have to face the truth that sadly, the survivors are going away slowly. But, as I said in the beginning, the youth is ready to take the responsibility, to follow the memories, to go on with the stories, and to tell the next generation. Not only to tell, but to take action. And how do they take actions? I will now present a few, sorry, I skipped a slide. So this is about the Youth Commission. I will now present a few flagship projects in our remembrance work. So the first one is Light of Hope. Light of Hope is a commemoration ceremony and march in remembrance of the November pogroms 1938. It takes place every year, and it started in 2012 actually as a really small event of the community. We had a march from the first district, the Stadttempel, which is the main synagogue and hasn't been fully destroyed during the Second World War, to the former Leopoldstädter temple, which has been totally destroyed during the November pogroms. It was a small event of 50 to 100 people. It was a very meaningful ceremony, and we did it for a few years. In 2017, we started to open it for the public. It had a twist, because we realized we have to work together. It is not just a responsibility of the Jewish youth or the Jewish community, it is a society duty to remember and to act. So we opened this event, and since then we have every year around 2,000 participants from all over Vienna. Jewish, non-Jewish, young adults, older people, also survivors accompanied us on this march already. Just last year we had a survivor with us. And what is so special about this march? And why do I want to mention the youth? And how do we work with the youth in kind of remembrance work? They lead this march. They go in the front. They build the first line. They invite. They create the ceremony, they choose the words, and they choose how they will deal with remembrance. And they do it with pride and with big responsibility. I work with them and sit with them for weeks. They try to figure out what are the right words, what are the right questions, what do we want to tell the people out there. And I'll just show you a video. It's in German, but it doesn't matter. I just want to give you an atmosphere about this march, and you can also see the youth. Maybe just before I start the video, we also changed the route. We are starting at Heldenplatz, which is the main historical place in Vienna, and we go through the first district, through the cities of Vienna, cities of the past, but also streets of the past, but also streets of the present. Things that happened there can happen again. And we want to remember, we want to show that this will never happen again. Can we start the video?
Es begann mit dem Wort, mit der Beleidigung, mit der Lüge, mit dem Gerücht über den Juden. Was am 9. November 1938 begann, endete in den Gaskammern von Mauthausen, Auschwitz, Treblinka und Mali-Trostinetz.
In den 1930er Jahren wurde in Zeitungen gegen Juden gehetzt. Heute zeigt sich Antisemitismus besonders auf sozialen Medien, wo Nutzer anonym judenfeindliche Kommentare hinterlassen und Verschwörungstheorien teilen. Antisemitische Aussagen, oft verkleidet als Meinungsfreiheit und Kritik an Israel, finden schnell Zustimmung.
Widerstand heute bedeutet also, aktiv zu sein. Nicht nur mit Worten, sondern besonders mit Taten. Es bedeutet, dafür zu sorgen, dass das Novemberpogrom und andere schreckliche Ereignisse nicht vergessen werden und sich nicht wiederholen können.
I'll just stop the video here because it's in German. I don't want to force you. But the thing is, you can see there are a lot of youths. They create the ceremony, they lead through the ceremony, and they also told of those who understand German, we want action. We need to act, that things like that never happen again. They always put a creative twist in their ceremonies. In this case, they create the signs of the addresses where the synagogues were in Vienna and took them on the way. They wanted to show that this happened in Vienna, in the streets where we're living in nowadays, in streets where Jewish life is luckily active again. But to remember and to remind that this will never happen again, we have to show outside in the city, in the streets again. The second project, and I'm happy to have somebody here from Mauthausen, this is our Mauthausen memorial trip every year. I think you have to, yes, great, thank you. So our Mauthausen memorial trip, which we do every year, 100 of youths are gathering, and I really want to emphasize this, at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to Mauthausen, to the former concentration camp, to take part in the ceremony, and also to have their own ceremony in front of the Jewish memorial there. Every year there is a working group who designs and creates the ceremony, and they always choose a topic because I think it's for them easier to be creative in their way, in their words, and in their way of understanding of remembrance to really show what it means to them. And just a few weeks ago on our ceremony, they chose the topic art. They choose different kind of arts, like poetry slams, music, literary texts, words to show their commemoration. And we really had a good feedback because it was real. And I think this is what it's about the youth. They don't hide, they don't play, they're real. And this is what makes it special and what makes it even more honest. And they start to ask questions also in the ceremony. And I think this is also what you just said. It's about time asking questions, the right questions, and also critical questions. And also in the Jewish environment, they're starting to ask questions. What will I carry forward? How will I take responsibility? What will I do so this never happens again? So it's also about the person, what each and everyone can do so we can prevent that this happened again. And the last project, I also have a video of that. This was this year. We had over 100 of youths at the ceremony and also guests from the main ceremony in Mauthausen. So the reason why I showed you this video is because I think you can see that the youth is active. It's not the adults standing up there. It's not the politicians standing up there. It's the youth who is leading. It's the youth who is creating the future and forming the future. And our last project or program is March of the Living. Maybe some of you know about it. It's an international program that brings people from all over the world together in a commemoration march from Auschwitz to Birkenau. It's always happening on Yom HaShoah, so the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And also every year we're sending a delegation of young Jewish people attending this march. And what is special about that, that also youths from our dialogue program LIKRAT, which I will talk afterwards, are joining this march. And what is LIKRAT? It's a dialogue program where young Jewish people get educated to talk about their personal Judaism. They encounter there over 1,000 of Austrian students, which are part of the MORA project, March of Remembrance and Hope. They meet each other there on this historical march and talk about how do we want to create remembrance? How do we want to create a culture of memory and understanding as a society? And this leads me now to the project which I really want to present is LIKRAT. As I said, LIKRAT is a dialogue program. It was actually founded in Switzerland. We have it here in Austria since 2015, so we have this year 10 years anniversary. And as I said, in this program, youths between 14 and 18 years old get professionally educated in the fields of Shoah education, Israel, Jewish history, Jewish religion, group dynamic, rhetoric and communication, and also Austrian history, to go into schools and other educational institutions to talk about their personal Judaism. Why I emphasize the personal Judaism? Because you have to know what is Jewish life. You have to know your present to understand the past. And I'm very, very sure if you understand that, we can work together and we can create a society which is tolerant and which will make sure that the past will never happen again. And what is also important, it's a peer-to-peer project. So no adults come into the class and talk about the Judaism. Kids or youths and youths talking to each other. They create an atmosphere where they can talk openly, where they can also ask critical questions, where they can discuss and have a safe space to talk about. Just in numbers, since 2015, we had 18,000 participants, so which means we met in encounters, 18,000 students and young people. We had over, I'm sorry that the S just flipped down, we had over 1,000 of encounters all over Austria. We are active all over Austria, not just in Vienna. We are based here, but we are active all over Austria. We have over 170 educated and trained LIKRATinos. We just finished our last cohort last weekend, so we'll have over 200 in the beginning of September. And also during Corona, we had to figure out how to move on, and we had over 50 online encounters. Except, fighting against anti-Semitism and fighting against possible prejudice, which are existing still in schools and educational institutions. And the problem is often that they're afraid to ask, so we're happy to give them a room where they can ask, where we can talk openly, and maybe also question which feel uncomfortable. But what can LIKRAT contribute to Holocaust education remembrance work? First of all, personal encounters create lasting remembrance, which means that they can build up an emotional connection with Jewish history and the present. Second, current relevance instead of only retroperception. And I have to say that the survivors are the most important persons for us. And as long as we have them, we'll keep them, we'll listen to the stories. But we have to realize that we also live here and now, and we have to take this in accord to that. So we have to reflect today's society and question the identity, the diversity, and the coexistence. Empowerment of the Jewish youth. LIKRAT is not only a project which goes on the out, but also works on the inside of the community. We strengthen the third and the fourth generation who become active leaders of remembrance culture, also with non-Jewish peers together. Prevention through dialogue. Our slogan is, let's talk, because we really think if we sit and talk, we can figure it out. You can ask, I will answer. Maybe we will agree to disagree, but we at least had a dialogue. And the dialogue opens a lot of doors. So we really think that with that we can fight anti-Semitism and prejudice addressed through a personal contact, peer to peer. Passing on memories in a new way. And I really want to emphasize the survivors are the most important persons for us. But we have to find new ways how we want to tell the stories, how we want to act, how we want to go into action, what will be left afterwards. Implementing remembrance in everyday education. Schools are the place for that. We bring Jewish voices directly into the schools. With that, we can start to have a new remembering culture and root and resonate over long term, building bridges between Jews and non-Jewish peers. As I said, it's a social duty. It's not only the duty and not the responsibility just from the Jewish people. We have to work with that together. That's why LIKRAT goes directly into the schools, directly into the institutions to talk it out. And the last thing, making continuity of Jewish life visible. Yes, the Shoah happened. Yes, the Shoah was a very dark part of history. But it continues, and there is a Jewish vibrant life. And we have to show that. Because, and I'm saying that because I really firmly believe the best answer to anti-Semitism is active, vibrant Jewish life. We are not only honoring with that the past, with dignity, but also calling for action and the present. Thank you. If there are any questions, feel free.
Thank you very much for this. Do you hear me? It works. Yeah, it works? Okay. Thank you very much for this presentation and for your insights in giving insights in the life of the Jewish young people, and it really gives hope to see your work. What is of interest to me is how do you engage non-Jewish young people together with these Jewish young people? Are they visiting the same schools, or how is this working? So my impression is that there's a Jewish life and a non-Jewish life. So how can you put them together? So that it not only is we come and tell us about us, but really living together. So this is what interests me. Thank you very much.
So first of all of the projects I mentioned at the beginning are open to the public. So automatically they meet each other, but especially through LIKRAT, non-Jewish peers and Jewish peers meet each other. So this is like a place which we create, but also like in normal life, a lot of Jews go to non-Jewish schools. They have non-Jewish friends. There are, it's part of their life to talk about it also to non-Jewish peers. But with LIKRAT, we really foster that in a very, created space. If that answers your question.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you so much. I have a question. What is your position regarding the actions of the the Israelite state against the Palestinian civilians? And what do you do to prevent that those people don't suffer what Jewish people suffer in the Second World War? Thank you.
Just this is a personal question to me, or like in field of. Okay, so first of all, I'm not like answering for the community. I cannot do that in this space. But I think at the end of the day, we all want to have peace. And this is a very complicated situation. I know maybe it's an answer you don't want to hear, but I think there are a lot of people who really want to solve the situation, who've tried to figure it out. But this is also what we try to do at LIKRAT. Things like, and questions like this come up in the school classes. You know, as you just said, they're seeing on TikTok, Instagram, social media, the topic is all around us. And I think at the end of the day, we need to figure out what we can do to make this world a better place. How we can understand each other better with empathy and with facts also. Like what happens really? What is the topic what we can discuss, and what is maybe a topic which we can't discuss because it's just, you know, not the truth, or maybe, you know, with a lot of emotions. Like go back to the basic. I think empathy is a very important thing, and also to talk about facts and to talk very clearly.
Thank you very much. There are two questions on the via Slido that came in. One is answered, I think. What do you demand to archive throughout this program? I'm not sure that I understand this question. Perhaps you can... To achieve through this program. To whom was this question directed? Okay. Do you have a democratic memory law in Austria? I don't think so. I thought, but there is nothing like what I would call a democratic memory law. Yeah? And of course, if you talk about, Jenny has to leave us. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, there is a party dispute when it comes to memorial sites and how to commemorate or what to commemorate, even when it comes to historical facts. I think facts are hard to dispute, but it happens. This will be a part of the program for tomorrow. We had inside just one brief glimpse on the historic development in Austria past 45. We had two talks about how to commemorate, and I would like now to invite Mr. Kranebitter to talk about the fight against fascism and how to deal with new fascist, Nazi developments in Austria. He's head of the Dokumentationsarchiv des österreichischen Widerstandes, the archive of documentation of Austrian resistance. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the invitation and also for the title. I think I didn't choose it, but I like it quite well. Fighting Fascism since 1945. And it's also that I will take you back again to the Austrian history after 1945. But I promise to be brief. I know it's been a long morning to all of us, so give me like 10 minutes and not more than that. So, the Documentation Center of Austrian Resistance, as its name says, has been established to document, archive, and research Austrian resistance, which was in a way over-exaggerated by the state of Austria, but not really researched thoroughly from below. So this was a founding of former resistance fighters, of Holocaust survivors, concentration camp survivors. That's an archive at first, then it's been a research institute devoting its research not only to the history of the fascisms in Austria, it's Austro-fascism and National Socialism, but also of right-wing extremism today, which I think is very important to talk about as the questions have been here, because we have to develop programs that are talking to society today and anti-democratic movements within this society of today. It's also a museum, it's a memorial site, and an educational institution and information center. I don't want to go into advertising, so you can look into our website and also download our publications, and also, of course, subscribe to our newsletter. That's all I want to say. So this is a publication that we've done on right-wing extremist attitudes in Austria, which is kind of important if we talk about today. So I think what is important to start with is that the first big exhibition in Austria dealing with its past, and this is why we talk about it, it's dealing with the history of National Socialism as part of a reorientation towards democracy and the reestablishment of democracy, as well as looking for this way of dealing with history, of the history of its own country, as an indicator for anti-democratic trends. That's why we talk about the history and the way of dealing with history. The first exhibition was done in 1946. From September to December 1946, it was shown to 260,000 people, visitors, which makes it the biggest exhibition after 1945 at all. And it was compiled to a large extent by former concentration camp survivors of different backgrounds. But at the same time, if you look at the discussions behind this exhibition, you see Austria in a nutshell, if you may. So it started with the title, Niemals vergessen, Never Forget, which was the final title, but it was not supposed to be the final title because the compromise actually was the brown plague, in order not to talk about Austro-fascism, but only about National Socialism. And other discussions behind it was that even the texts of this exhibition done by concentration camp survivors was to be read by all three parties, the Conservative Party, the Social Democrat Party, and the Communist Party, and released by those parties. So it's a kind of compromise solution, a very Austrian way of dealing with history. And you see also this kind of compromising history by the blank fields that were going with these exhibition, the blank spaces. For one, you see here on the right a room dealing with the Holocaust. It was not supposed to be there in the first plans of the exhibition. For a second, you see on the left a memorial for the victims of fascism. And it was not intended to be blank, but the base of the statue was to be filled with names of victims, but Austria couldn't agree on what the victims are. So the conservatives tried to write on this pedestal the name of, for example, Engelbert Dollfuss, who was the chancellor to become dictator of the Austro-fascist regime. And the Social Democrats wanted to write down his victims as well. So the solution, the compromise, was to not write down anything, a very Austrian way of silencing history. In short, even though resistance against National Socialism and proof of this resistance, as we have heard, was crucial in the Moscow Declaration of 1943 and in the succeeding negotiations for the State Treaty of 1955, and thus state building in the truest sense, it was left to a minority to really care about it, since the majority of Austria's population was still post-fascist. To give you just one example, I'm a sociologist by training, so I have opinion polls with me all the time. The fascist attitudes were measured by the US Army after 1945, and there were questions raised like, is Nazism a good idea just carried out badly? And you can imagine that this is a question that actually finds Nazi ideology in a very easy way, and you would imagine people not to answer in a positive way to this question. In August 1947, you had 38.7% of the Austrian population agreeing with this statement, and this was rising. So this is the point that I'm making with this exhibition. It was not about the past only, it was about the present and about the anti-democratic fascist ideology is still living on. In December 1947, this rose to 51%, and in February 48 in Linz, it was even 61.9% of people agreeing to this statement. National socialism was a good idea, just carried out badly. So after 1955, after also the Allied left and Austria did its duty of proving resistance with just one booklet, actually, nobody talked about the past anymore, and Austria was left to the Austrians. Also in dealing with its past, so it was up to this very active and strong minority of survivors of concentration camps, Holocaust survivors of different factions, coming together and documenting this past, analyzing this past. The documentation center was this actually after Mauthausen, which was founded in 47 or handed over by the Soviet army to the Austrian state and then integrated into the Ministry of the Interior in 1949, but nothing was done until 1970, until the first exhibition was done there. The only place where you could really get informed about the history of National Socialism. And it was people coming together from really very different backgrounds. It was communists and monarchists. It was social democrats and conservatives coming together and founding this archive, which is an interesting story in itself, because I think in 1963, throughout Europe, you don't have a lot of similar institutional foundings, since we're talking about the high phase of the Cold War here. So you can imagine that coming together and founding an institution like this involves three things. The first would be an absent state. Austria was absent in dealing with its history. The second was a willingness to cooperate among different factions. And the third connected to this is that they who really did this research were minorities among their own parties. So it was minorities among the Communist Party. Herbert Steiner was the first founder and director of the Documentation Center, as well as minorities within the Socialist Party and the Conservative Party. So the Documentation Center was not only an archive, but also a counter-archive from its beginning, collecting what others didn't collect, telling the history that others didn't want to tell, and supporting the state even where the state didn't want to support itself. You can also imagine the way of the kind of society that you were talking about in the early 1960s in Austria, if you listen to examples like this. So in the early 1960s, it was still debated if the originals should be kept in Vienna or rather be sent to Switzerland to be kept in a Swiss bank safe and only to document or to work with copies in Austria, because they didn't trust that it would be a good idea to work with originals. In 1962, also the book owner of a bookshop in Graz said that he couldn't display a book about National Socialism without running the risk of having the windows smashed. Fortunately, of course, much has changed to the better since the 1960s and I won't walk you through all the decades after that. But of course, now the state supports things that he hasn't supported, and we have already heard about the 1980s and the very crucial phase of discussing about Austria's past. It took until the early 2000s to even fund the state-run memorial at Mauthausen, which is the biggest or the only site of a concentration camp memorial in Austria with its subcamp. So it took a lot of time to fund it, but still now we do have the support, not only as the DÖF, but as different institutions of memory and remembrance, of Gedenkpolitik and commemoration policy that we didn't have for a long time. But of course, this is not to be taken for granted. This is the second part of what we are doing. It's already been mentioned. So we're documenting right-wing extremism, neo-Nazism today, also in an official mission for the Ministries of the Interior and the Ministry of Justice in Austria, the report on right-wing extremism, and also doing our own surveys about Austrian population nowadays. And I just want to say that the extreme right in Austria's politics is constantly on the rise. We know that not only from parties, but also from attitudes and also from questions that we raise. You can't read this, I guess, because it's too small. Sorry for that. And due to the time, I only want to go into detail with these questions. You can, as I said, I will also leave 2 booklets here for us. It's important to say that right-wing extremism is not just another way of telling history or an unwillingness of dealing with the Nazi past in Austria, which it is. It is also incapable of dealing with history because it's not really into researching history in a critical way or a democratic way, but it's also only looking about orientation and identity within politics. And if you're looking for history to make you proud as a nation, you're definitely not a historian or someone dealing with or being able to deal with the past, but just an ideologue on the right. So to give you but one example, those are the questions dealing with National Socialism. And you have one question, so this is actually on this slide, that discussions about World War II and the Holocaust should be ended. And this is a question that the whole population in Austria, which is in blue, agrees with up to 42%, which is on the rise again. So it's nearly half of the Austrian population agreeing to there should be an end to dealing with history. And among right-wing extremists or those with high possibility of right-wing extremist attitudes, I can't go into detail here. In red, you even have 90% agreeing to this. So this is what we are dealing with, and we have to be not naive about it, but to take this into consideration when we're talking about a commemoration policy. And I want to conclude by only saying two things. The first thing is that our task is, of course, far from over, and that it will never be over, because the transition from totalitarianism to democracy is not a linear path to an end of history, but of course a constant fight for democracy, and a way of dealing with its past is one important part of this. And the second thing is that this task is, of course, not only our task, but it's the task of politics in general, and of, more importantly, the society in general. We can only master this task together, and only within a democratic society that is even willing to deal with its past. So I'm looking forward to your questions, and also to more of a kind of dialogue and interaction between us, because it's important to network and to deal with this among our different countries in Europe, which have not the same problems, but similar problems. Thank you very much. Sorry? Well, this is just examples of these questions. I'm sorry, so it's gone. It's here again. So these are questions dealing with anti-Semitism in Austria, and we took over questions that the German Institute in Leipzig also used, with differentiating quite clearly between a traditional anti-Semitism, an Israeli-related anti-Semitism, and also something that we call Schuldabwehr anti-Semitism in Austria. It's guilt. How do you translate it? Denying the guilt of Austria and Germany, which is very particular in Austrian anti-Semitism. So, for example, another example is that for Israel-related anti-Semitism, Israel crimes are worse than that of other nations, which makes this kind of double standard clear, that you're differentiating between Israel on the one hand and Russia on the other. For example, in military operations, which you all ways can and should criticize, I believe, but by the same standards and not by different standards. And those questions were developed to measure this kind of anti-Semitism. You want to raise something?
Yeah, just asking about the question about Israel.
Yeah.
Do you differentiate precisely between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, or do you sometimes merge the two, or does it depend on what exactly you're trying to see?
Well, there is a discussion within sociology going on about special anti-Zionist questions. Those are more broader Israel-related questions. For example, and this is a very, very good example, this question of if the way that the Israeli army deals with Gaza is the same as the Nazi atrocities, which is not a critic of the Israeli military actions and the war waged by Israel and the government, the right-wing government, but another form of comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, which is especially in Austria, as you can imagine, a measurement of anti-Semitism. And there are, of course, others, but I invite you really to also have a look into this barometer that we published here. So this is really something about anti-democratic attitudes in general, anti-Semitism and racism also in a broader term. Please have a look into the questions there.
Any other?
My name is Guilherme. I'm from Portugal, and I was very interested in all the presentations, and I was also doing some research while listening to the presentations about your current political scenario and making some comparisons with our political scenario in Portugal, which there are some that we can do. But my question is about this anti-Semitism that comes from the Nazi backgrounds and roots and today's far-right kind of narrative, which at least in Portugal we don't have this anti-Semitism and Nazi roots background, but we have this immigration kind of and the usage of immigration as a tool to gain votes and to gain power and to convince people to vote in them. And my question is, do you think that this FPO strategy towards immigration is related to Jewish people or is more related to Muslim people that are coming, for example, from Syria, from other countries, as Austria is the country in the EU that receives the most refugees per capita? Do you think that far-right today is leveraging anti-Semitism as a weapon, or is more leveraging other types of racism?
It's a good question, a very big question, of course, but I would say on an overt level, the FPÖ wouldn't really raise anti-Semitism on a superficial level, because it simply is too complicated, and it's easier to align with, or to try to align with Netanyahu than to raise anti-Semitism as a political strategy. That said, there is, of course, the talk about globalists, for example. There is the thought, which is just a synonym for a world Jewish, this myth of conspiracy theory, which is not a theory at all, that globalists are ruling the world in a programmed way. And it is the very higher echelons of the party talking about that and things like that. But on an overt level, you do have an instrumentalization of anti-Muslim attitudes. And you see at the same time, when you look at it sociologically, that both rise at the same time. So it's rising, anti-Semitism as well as anti-Muslim racism is rising at the same time, and this goes hand in hand. So I would say that you have to differentiate, of course, between the public strategy of the party and the real ideological core of the party, which talks about a society, ethnically homogeneous society of Austrians, whatever that is, I would say. And it's a very biological, very racist, ethnical understanding of society and of something that they even call people's community, which doesn't sound that bad in English. In German, it's Volksgemeinschaft, and it's a very Nazi term even. And it's still there in the party program. So you do have, you can point it out clearly there, but you have to differentiate between the political strategy and the ideological core. But of course, also good luck to Portugal.
Perhaps may I add something to this question?
Sure.
There was a shift in the public presentation of the FPÖ's program and attitude. There were clear signs of anti-Semitism in the end of the 80s. And when the party chairmanship changed to the current, it's changed from anti-Semitic attitudes, clear or, subsurface or coded messages, into a more anti-Muslim support for Israel. And the interesting thing is that, as we heard, the ideological core groups, for example, those, I don't know how to, the Kopfstudenten in English.
Yeah, well, it's a German nationalist student
corps.
Yeah.
German nationalist student corps are a core group of supporters and resources and recruitment for the Freedom Party, they are still very close to these anti-Semitist talks. Yeah? And this is very ambiguous, and one of the things we perhaps get acquainted with when we talk Austrian history, a leading Austrian scholar called it a paradox republic. And we find a lot of paradoxes in the Austrian history and in the current political system and its historical roots. Thank you very much. Any other questions? If this is not the case, there is one, yeah? Okay, please. Thank you very much for your talk. This was a first insight into the Austrian history, into the Austrian past, as we are hosting these international events. We have to be aware, I think, of the differentiation between us and them, the detachment, the alienation of others. Yeah? We are the better Austrians, we are the better Democrats, we are the real Democrats, we are the real Europeans. This is something that is dangerous. We have to look into perhaps the future more than into the present. We heard this 2 times today. And I think over the afternoon and the day tomorrow, we can harvest a little bit from the talks we heard and enter into a debate. There are, I think, mainly one thing that blocks you from entering the buffet. This is a proper group photo here that we need for documentation, and we would like to ask you to come forward so that we can take a joint photo of all of us. Yeah. And after this, we would like to ask you to grab some of the balloons, or the balloons that are outside. Write a little note if you want to, and we would like to get them started all jointly. This is a part of our communication strategy. And we have, there is a souffleuse, come up and help me. We have interviews with our partners, and we will ask them to do this in the garden during lunch or before? Now. So everything all at once. Yeah? Photo here, outside interviews and balloons. Please come up for the photo.
That would be great, thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was in Mauthausen for the visit of the King and Queen.
The Spanish King and Queen?
Yeah,
that's
the
exciting.
Spanish embassy.
Yeah, that was very exciting.
Yeah, that was a fantastic visit, actually. They developed very well, and Pedro Carmona, you know,
Pedro and Christian
were with them, and they were very, very interested on everything on the educational side. So it was quite a nice visit.
I think Pedro is Spanish.
Yeah, Pedro is Spanish. Yeah.
Stefan. We need our Italian partner on the... Stefan. go to the balloons, right?
Yes, some volunteers.
We asked the youngest anyway.